The UFC is known for having some of the greatest moments throughout MMA history, from fights that would change the trajectory of the sport to women's MMA proving to be just as entertaining. They are home to the most recognizable stars of today that we all come to know and love, which would allow them to sell out across the globe. But today we're going to talk about the darker side of the UFC, the main reasons that have them under scrutiny and why this affects the sport. Starting with fighter pay. Fighter pay has been a huge controversial topic. The UFC was hit with the antitrust lawsuit that resulted in them paying $375 million. The UFC was accused of creating an anti-competitive landscape in an attempt to monopolize the sport. To make things simple, they essentially bought out and absorbed the rosters of these other MMA promotions, making them the only relevant place for fighters to go, which is great for the UFC, but bad for the fighters because they would have the upper hand in every negotiation.
I think the way that the business is set up, like they pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating, because either way, you're still in the contract.
So the way things are set up, it does make it harder for the fighters to have a leverage in negotiating. And I believe this because Mighty Mouse did say that he had to work an honest job all the way up until he became champion, which is absolutely crazy. Another person that's been outspoken on the topic is Ariel Helwani. Here's what he had to say in regards to sponsorships and MMA.
Be sponsored by Nike, right? LeBron James makes more money off of Nike than he does off the Lakers. You know what I mean? How are you guys being compensated? And I could totally understand when people say, oh, they're giving you a platform. You're fighting on ESPN. You're going to be popular. Great. But why are you being, shut out of all these other potential things? And oh, by the way, have you looked at the cage lately? Have you looked at how many sponsors are on that thing?
Like
there's
20.
never been more sponsors on that thing.
And Ariel makes a great point here. The UFC has no problem slapping on 20 logos where they are raking in a ton of money from these sponsors. They have no problem locking in a deal with Reebok at the expense of their fighters. Most of these fighters would not have wanted to be a part of this deal because a lot of them who are making dough from their sponsors are not making that with Reebok. Quite frankly, the UFC could care less about that. And so the main issues are the UFC has all the leverage with the contracts. Number two, the Reebok deal did a lot more damage than it did good. It was only good for the UFC. In my opinion, the base fighter pay could be higher considering all the expenses that they have, and the UFC could afford it. And so next on the list is the betting scandal. Now, if you haven't heard about this, here's what happened. The UFC was hit with yet another betting scandal, the first one involving James Krause and Derek Minner. I'm sure a lot of you guys already know about that one. November 1st, UFC Vegas 110, Garcia versus Onama. Up-and-coming prospect Isaac Dogarian would be set to take on Yadier Dovae. Now, hours before this fight would actually take place, there were people tweeting about how there was some suspicious movement within the betting lines. Isaac Dogarian moving from minus 250 all the way to minus 166. Despite being a favorite in this fight and being an up-and-coming prospect, Isaac Dogarian did not show this type of level in this fight. The lackluster performance raised suspicion with not just the fans, the fighters too were very critical about how he tried to defend the choke. Instead of defending the choke, Michael Chiesa says that he had him lost out there, that he had him out of sorts, and that's Jiu-Jitsu 101 to fight the choke first.
This guy do anything right trying to defend the rear naked choke?
No, he was doing everything wrong. Usually when you got that deep,
tap
like,
right away. Yeah.
Tap right away. For me, he was like showing, I'm gonna show that was hard.
From the suspicious betting movements to the way that the fight went down, a lot of people were starting to raise red flags and wondering if the UFC was complicit in all this. We ended up finding out that the UFC's betting integrity company, IC360, had actually called up the UFC hours before, letting them know that there were suspicious betting moves. And here's what Dana White had to say about it.
Fight, do we know anything? We didn't. So what we did was we called the fighter and his lawyer and said, what's going on? There's some weird action going on in your bet, weird betting action going on in your fight. Are you injured? Do you owe anybody money? Has anybody approached you to, and the kid said, no, absolutely not. I'm going to kill this guy. And, so we said, okay. The fight plays out and first round finish by rear naked choke. Literally the first thing we did was call the FBI.
you in many ways.
Hey, I said, don't bet on me unless you're paying me some percentage. I'm doing all the work. That's how I feel about it.
And so Isaac Dogarian did get cut. I'm not saying he's guilty, but it is very highly suspicious. And so the main issues here is that it ruins the trust in the integrity of the sport. It damages relationships with your sportsbook betting partners, and it increases the law enforcement scrutiny, especially with this being the second betting scandal that they've had. They're definitely going to be looked at with a critical eye. Next controversial topic is going to be reffing and judges. At UFC 305, Tai Tuivasa would take on Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik would basically use his kickboxing to stay at range. In this fight, he was picking Tai apart, and Tai Tuivasa was just looking for that one big shot, and he ended up losing this fight, rightfully so. But the judges in this fight had a scorecard that was so egregious that they ended up getting him escorted out. He didn't finish the night judging. Now, on the reffing side of things, we have an incident with Jason Herzog. UFC Fight Night, Jared Cannonier versus Nasruddin Imavov. Nasruddin would end up clipping Jared Cannonier, kind of having him off balance. As he was going in for the kill, Jared was still defending, but Jason Herzog stopped the fight. A lot of people think that this fight was stopped early, and I tend to agree with that, but this is by no means the worst stoppage of all time. But Jason Herzog is a veteran referee, and you kind of want to minimize these offenses. Another bad case for the judges occurred at UFC 310, Cyril Gane versus Volkov 2. So Volkov was clearly winning this fight. He was outlanding Cyril Gane for majority of the fight, and most of the people scored the fight like this judge here. The other two judges said, hold my beer, and they scored the fight for Gane, which this is sad for Volkov because he would have got a title shot if he had won this fight. In this fight, Cyril Gane didn't look that great. He didn't have the bounce that he normally has in the fight, and there's a reason for that. Cyril Gane suffered a broken foot at some point in the first round. And while that sucks that he couldn't perform at his best, it sucks even worse for a guy who didn't get the nod due to incompetent judging. And back over on the reffing side of things, we got an incident with Dan Miragliotta. Al Nelson versus Matt Frevola took each other on at UFC Fight Night in Vancouver. Nelson ends up landing a big shot in the first round, and as he starts to move in for the kill, he takes him down, starts landing some ground and pound. Miragliotta stops the fight with 3 seconds left on the clock. At this point, Kyle and everyone else thinks that he won the fight. Miragliotta looks dead in his eyes, and he said, I never stopped the fight. Fight's still on. And so the fight keeps going all the way up until the third round, where Kyle Nelson ends up winning by decision. In the end, Miragliotta didn't even look happy with his own performance. The main issues are when these refs and judges make these mistakes, the fighter can lose half of their pay. Another issue is that these fighters can lose their position in the rankings. So rather than fighting for a title shot, you might have to just fight for your position just to be in the top 5. And lastly, these judges do not have to take any accountability. You might see a ref on Ariel Helwani or doing some sort of podcast explaining, but the judges, they never have to do that, or I don't even think they would be willing to. Alright guys, and that does it for the video. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe as I am a smaller channel that's trying to grow.